Fred and I are working on a little bit of a project here. Fred Castaneda is one of our longtime students. Nice guy, smart guy. And what we're doing is we're kind of working on a little thing. We're looking to leverage some of our screencasting skills, screencast and PowerPoint skills, into the world of podcasting. Okay, let me ask you this. How many of you out there are working with podcasts or taking your video content and repurposing them into podcasts? Anybody? If you're not, I'm going to suggest that it's one of those things that can definitely increase your reach. You already have the audio for a lot of content that you probably create, right? And Marcia Berkeley says, but only for education. That's awesome. One of the best things we can do as video creators is to educate our audiences. Even if you're a video marketer, okay, people buy from people they know, like, and trust. And the best way to do that is to educate, to teach people, to become the go-to expert in whatever field it is that you are. And the way you do that is you help people in spades without the expectation of reciprocity. And people will buy from you just because of that. So that's why we put out so much content on the YouTube channel, so many tips and tricks and stuff like that. Because when it comes time to build a following of people that are more than just leads, they are your rabid fans instead of just people that you happen to communicate with or try to sell stuff to. Selling's hard. I don't try to sell that much, What I do is I put out useful content, and if people want to buy, that's awesome. Put out stuff that I use and I like, and I show people how to use it the same way. And I tell them what problems it solves and, stuff like that. That's what people want. They want your perspective and your guidance. Okay, so that's kind of a good way to go. Well, if you create content like that, and if you think about it, if you've ever listened to a podcast, a lot of times that's what that kind of content is. It's people, reporting on stuff. In fact, Fred's site here is called Podcast Reporter. And what Fred does is he reports on podcasting stuff, right? Interviews and interesting things that come about and useful tools and resources. Well, here's the thing. We already have a whole bunch of this content, okay, in the form of an audio. And it's good audio. Podcasters, look at this dude right here. Podcasters typically know how to create excellent audio content. It's like listening to a radio show.
Don't touch that dial.
Right? And if you already have that kind of content, then one of the things we're looking at doing is, gosh, how can we leverage that and just turn it into video content as well? So iTunes, as an example, is one of the places where people distribute their podcast content. And there are podcasters out there with thousands and thousands of listeners, of loyal listeners, because it's good stuff. Well, if we can take that content and leverage it into another platform besides iTunes, I don't know, like the second largest search engine on the planet, and recently the #1 social media site overtaking Facebook, YouTube, right? So you can just imagine all the yummy goodness that happens as a result of that. Okay, so here's the scoop. Fred and I are kind of trying to figure out what that entails. So what he's done is he sent me the audio for one of his recent podcasts, and what I'm kind of doing here is I am kind of setting it to slides. And what we're trying to do is figure out, well, we don't want it to be complicated. So are there some simple rules and some simple things that people can use to do that? And coincidentally, of course, I've been teaching a lot of this kind of stuff for quite a while. In essence, we're going to take an audio recording and make a visual presentation out of it, right? Fred, I just unmuted you. Are you there?
Hey, how you doing, Lon?
Hey, boss man.
Can you hear me? I'm coming through, Lucky Chucky.
Lucky Chucky, 5x5. Can you just give us a quick perspective to elaborate a little bit on what I was talking about? Any thoughts?
Right. You mean the content of the presentation of the podcast that I did?
Well, maybe even not that specifically, but just a little bit in general about why some of our folks, the video folks, would want to leverage their audio content into podcasting. I mean, is it a big deal? Or
No, if you're coming from the end of a podcaster, you've already created the audio content, as I did in this one. There's a post that I did on July 18th, and it's called The 9 Things You Won't Get If You Do Not Attend the Podcast Movement Conference, which happens to be a conference for podcasters. And that was pure audio, and it had just show notes, as you showed them in the blog site, which was nothing but a WordPress site with media. Well, you could take that audio, put slides to it the way you did, and now you create a screencast out of it, which then it is actually high-quality instruction and good content, but instead of having the graininess and this audio qualities you have in a regular webinar, it's webinar quality 101, because it has the top quality audio and top quality video of a screencast, and people will sit there and they will watch it because of the good quality and the good content. So you can get good quality viewers and listeners to it, and all it takes is just taking the podcast audio, putting it on one track, and creating a screencast around that using Camtasia and PowerPoint slides, just like you did.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I want to point out here, though, is for our folks tonight here, screencasters, is that we have the audio. And one of the things we might want to do is to take that audio and create a podcast. So just kind of going the other way. My question to you is that a worthwhile thing to do? Is podcasting, or are podcasts in general, I guess, a good, effective way to get an audience? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's growing. There's 70 million podcasters every month that are downloading good content, and we've even seen that some of the YouTubers who are making money on YouTube are now coming over and creating podcasts. It's a second renaissance of podcasting, and what they're doing is they're taking the audio from their YouTube video, they're ripping it, and they're then publishing out as an audio podcast. Now, podcasts don't have to be just audio. They could be video as well. So you could have a video podcast, but more what you said, they're taking the audio and they're putting it up on iTunes and other distribution channels, other podcatchers we call them, and now they extend their audience. There's one guy in particular, his name was Pat Flynn. He had a very successful blogger, and he was doing the passive income blog. Well, he went into podcasting and he grew it by like 25% and still growing it. And he's making a ton of money from it now, whereas before he was just using one medium, which was the blog. Now he's using a different channel. He's using podcasting, audio podcasting, and now he's going to video, and he's monetizing it more and more. So if you're a screencaster, you can always take and rip the audio off, create a podcast. Now you expand your audience to so much more. There's 1.5 billion individual podcast episodes every month that are downloaded, and it's growing. It's growing by leaps and bounds. That's why they have this conference now, Podcast Movement, which is being put on by podcasters for podcasters. And it doesn't matter if they're audio or video podcasters. Most of them are audio. But the content is getting better. The audio is definitely superior quality. And if you're not into this particular channel, then you're leaving money on the table, because the people who listen to audio podcasts have one thing that the video screencasters don't have, and that is you have the intimacy of a dedicated ear, and nothing is as intimate as an audio podcast, because you can be using dead time, that is driving in your car and listening it through your speakers in the car radio, or you can be, say, doing household chores. Doesn't matter whether you're cooking, preparing dinner, cleaning, washing dishes, whatever. You could be listening to content and getting that content absorbed and what we call consuming it, which will be a benefit to you, where you can't do that with video, because with video you have to have totally undistracted, non-distracted attention, and you have to be watching a screen in a fixed place, and you can't do that while you're driving a car. Do you know most podcasts are listened to by cars? Every 20-minute commute, there's somebody listening to a podcast now through Stitcher and other types of elements that are now being put into cars automatically. So you're going to have podcasting as part of the standard feature of a car.
I like it. And you know what? You had me at 1.5 billion downloads.
That's right, 1.5 billion downloads of separate podcast episodes. But there are 70 million podcasters out there who, publish and get downloads every single month, and it's growing. We thought perhaps that it was in a lull because it exploded in 2004 and 2005. I've been podcasting for almost 9 years now, and exploded, and it was very interesting. But a lot of people said, oh, how can I make money on this? Well, if I build it, they will come. It's just like a screencast. If you build it, they will not come. If you build it, they won't come. But if you promote it, they may come. And if you know how to sell it with a good message, then they may buy. And then if you follow up with them and get them to treat you as a trusted advisor, then you'll have a loyal following audience of raving fans.
Okay, cool.
And then they'll buy from you over and over again. And by the way, people who podcast and started with audio podcasting, they now went into video. There's one guy called the Podmedic. He happens to be Jamie Davis, and he has now left his job as a nurse and as a medic, and guess what he's doing now? He calls himself a medical journalist. He's out there interviewing people with video, creating screencasts, creating podcasts, and he's got like 7 podcasts out there for nursing and for first responders, for disaster relief, all sorts of things that are with the medical and health industry. He teaches at a university now. Got that job as a result of his podcasts and his video. So he went the way of audio podcasting, incorporated videos and screencasts, and now he left his day job because he's making more money now doing what he's doing than he did when he was a nurse and a medic.
That sounds good. Fred, you're not a little geeked up about this, are you, at all?
Well, actually, podcasting is a passion that I've had for 9 years. Still have it. I've had 16 podcasts over the past 9 years, shows, that is, separate shows, and 14 of them at one time. Literally, it was burning myself out. I'm now down to 7, and this happens to be one of them, which is called podcastreporter.com. The other 6, I do podcasts for veteran service organizations, that is, nonprofits. I have a podcast called The Struggling Entrepreneur, which, Lon, you were interviewed back in December 2012 on that show.
Yep.
Right. And I also have another podcast called Entrepreneur Tools Online, where I examine different electronic tools and different electronic forms and documents and things that entrepreneurs can use, and they may be either fee or free. And then I have another podcast which is called, and think of this, Boomers for Startups. That is for the frosty hairs, for those of us who were born between 1946 and 1964, the baby boomers, because they're now getting into creating their own entrepreneurship after they retire or have been laid off. And they're now growing as well. You got 80 million of them. And so the target audience is there. If you can get the good message for them to say, here's something that it will be good for you, then they will subscribe. Now, the good thing about podcasting is, just like YouTube, you can subscribe and get content sent down to you automatically through the channel of your choice. It could be iTunes, or it could be for those people who have iPods, iPads, and iPod Touches. Anything with iOS 8 coming out in September will have an automatic podcast app, and that can stream your favorite podcast to you just by an app interface, touching it once or twice, getting it subscribed to, and now you've got your podcast there at a moment's notice. And these are audio podcasts that you can listen to anywhere, anytime, at your choice of when you want to listen to it and the device you want to listen to it and the way you want to get it. You don't have to go through iTunes, but iTunes is the 800-pound gorilla, and you've got, what is it now, more than 1 million podcast shows that are out there that you can subscribe to, everything from knitting, which happens to be one of the biggest podcasts. They have mommy casts and daddy casts for the single fathers and single mothers out there taking care of their children. And of course, I think the heaviest segment is tech. They have lots of tech podcasts out there. And this was especially a niche, what you see on the screen. This was a podcast episode that I did in audio that said, hey, you're going to miss out if you don't go to this conference, and here's the 9 things that you'll miss out.
Well, we're going to look at that in just a second here.
Okay.
I'd like folks to kind of also think about here is a way of creating content. One of the best things you can do, and one of the easiest things you can do, is to interview somebody. If you are starting off in a market and maybe you're not an expert or considered an expert in that area, here's a good tip. Find the expert out there, okay, and ask them if you can do an interview. And what that does is it almost makes you an expert by association, as an example, but it's a great way to kind of get started and to get a little bit of credibility. And then once you have that audio file, Well, certainly, again, we can leverage that into some video content. Let's take a quick look at kind of how to do that. So this is kind of the premise here. Fred gave me this audio interview or this audio presentation that he did, and all I'm really doing is setting it to slides. So I'm going to give you a few tips on kind of how I'm doing that just to get it started here. And I haven't finished this yet, but I'll put some design points in here, and you can kind of see, I think, for the most part, I am going to be able to do this just with PowerPoint because I want to keep things simple. Okay, I do not want to clutter up a bunch of stuff. I just want to put some decent visuals, and we'll reiterate some of our best practices and stuff as we kind of go along here. So the beginning step here, since I'm making a video, is that I want to make sure that I make it widescreen. I'm in PowerPoint 2010. In 2013, it's widescreen by default. So I just went to page setup, and I chose, so I would just choose 16 by 9. As the widescreen format. But just make sure your slides are widescreen and you'll be fine. And I could have gone in and messed with some themes or some templates or something like that. For this particular example, I want to make this as easy and clean and simple as possible. So I just went with a white background. Okay, my first step was to go ahead and get that audio file and insert it into the very first slide. Okay, and the way I did that, I just went to Insert, Audio, pick the file, and it puts it on the slide here. Okay, and once that's done, I kind of highlight it here, and I go into the playback of that, and I want to hide this during the show because I'm going to be recording this using the record slideshow feature once I get all this stuff done. Okay, so you could move it off the slide if you want. I just hide it during the show. And then the second thing is I want it to play across all slides, right? And you'll see why in a second. One more kind of crucial step here is that once I have it selected, I'm also going to go to Animations, and I'm going to open up my animation pane. I want this particular element to be at the very top. So if you've added animations or something, it might be down here. I want to put it right up at the top, and I want it to start with previous. So let's think about what's going to happen there for just a second. When I click into slideshow mode, or when I go to slideshow, record slideshow to make a video out of it, what's going to happen is this very first dealie up here is going to start playing automatically. And it's going to continue playing throughout, well, as long as I want it to play, as I click through and all of that good stuff. So all I've done is I've kind of taken just a couple little graphics, a little screenshot here, and put a title in, just a few simple animations. And I'm going to, I'm just going to kind of go into slideshow mode, and we'll see how well this works just for a second, so you get a little bit of an idea. So I'm going to go into slideshow mode, and then I'm just going to click and go along with the content that I've kind of gotten from the audio track. Okay, so let's try that just for a second. So it's going to start.
This is Podcast Reporter at www.podcastreporter.com. A bonus episode. What are 9 things that you won't get and that you'll be missing out on if you don't go to Podcast Movement, the conference? In this episode of www.podcastreporter.com, we actually go into 9 different things that you're going to be missing out on if you don't go to the Podcast Movement Conference in person.
So I've just added a couple of simple transitions, a couple of quick screen grabs, but it all just basically follows along with the content. So I'm going to just make a couple of quick points here. I'm not going to use a lot of bullet points. I use bullets when there is a list of things that need to be kind of in the same thought, the benefits of the conference. And so that's about the only time you'll see me using bullet points as I kind of flip through these slides. Okay, another design element is I'm going to have one image per page for the most part, right? And I'm going to make it big and I'm going to make it bold. Okay, I'm just going to go into slideshow mode here, and we won't be able to hear the audio, but it will follow the audio by just kind of building. Okay, notice I used a nice big font. This is called the Bebas font, and I've also kind of used another little trick that if I had left this all black, okay, what happens is, well, I don't know, it just kind of washes out, and it's just not visually, design-wise, quite as interesting. But here, you'll kind of notice, and I use this consistently throughout the presentation. So you're going to see me use about 2 fonts. You're going to see me using big images that go with the audio narration in a general way. And then what we're going to do is be able to listen to Fred's rich, yummy voice and his excellent content as it kind of moves through the various slides and stuff like that. So this is what he's talking about. And I'm really just built these bullets off of the narration. Okay, so literally, he talks about tools. Then he talks about this. So it's kind of a list of the benefits. And I just listen for when he says, tips and techniques, and it's a conference for podcasters by podcasters, and I'm clicking to bring in just some very simple animations. And he talks about Gary Leland's site and how he has a magazine, and so I'm just bringing in some very simple elements with some extra information that people might want to find useful and wish to consume. So again, a nice big image and following his narration, and what he's going to do here is get into the 9 reasons why you might want to make sure that you incur the expense and not just buy the virtual ticket, right? So here's what you're going to miss. Number 1, right? Now notice what a lot of people would be tempted to do is they would put a big number 1 or something here. But this is kind of what I'm thinking of using design-wise, right? So the first thing you're going to miss is the minds. Being able to be in the hallways and interact with people and pick each other's brains. This is my basic design, okay? And now watch what happens. So I'm going to move to item number 2, and it's just going to fade that out, and boom, in comes the second one, and a corresponding graphic. And if I'm going to add extra elements that go along with this particular thought, well, I just kind of do it in a simple, clean, interesting way. But notice how it's just not cluttered. Okay? I don't want it to be a mess. And what a lot of people will be tempted to do is to make it a big old mess. Right? And I'm just trying not to do that. So I'm going to show you the technique I'm using here to kind of bring in a list. So I've set my design, and then kind of what I do is I just duplicate slides. So I'll duplicate this. Let's go to the last one here, the tech. And I'm going to duplicate it. And then I'm going to go to Fred's list of, let's see what comes after the tech. The hallways. Hallways. Okay, and then I'm going to find me a graphic that kind of goes with that. And it's really kind of an easy way to make things really move smoothly. So what I'll do is, once I've created this new slide, I'm going to just use a simple transition, a simple fade transition. Okay, so I don't have to animate a lot of stuff, but watch what happens. When I go from this slide, the tech, I'm just going to click. This is going to disappear. I didn't have to do any stupid exit animations, and the new one is going to fade in. Watch. Okay? So that's I want to make it easy to do this because I'm thinking that what podcasters aren't going to want to do is to become a whole bunch of video kind of experts and spend a whole bunch of time, going through this conversion process, right? And things like that. So now this took me, about an hour and a half to get to the point where I am. But really, I spent a lot of time trying to decide on a design and things like that. So the thing that I'm thinking is now, though, that, I have a little bit of a template here. And for, any number of top 5 tips or top 10 tip kind of podcast episodes, I can kind of reuse this and things like that. So it's almost one of those things that once I get a couple of them done, I'll be able to go in for future content and just kind of modify stuff, right? And I think it's going to flow really well, and it's going to be really easy to create. So like I say, once I get this all kind of fleshed out, but I'll go into slideshow, and, I'll rehearse it a few times so that I get my clicks down along with Fred's voice, and then I'll just record slideshow, and I'll start recording the slides and animations, and I don't need narrations because the audio is already embedded, and I'll start recording. Anyway, let's see if there are any kind of questions here. Oh, Fred, for you, one thing that I'm finding that is really going to be useful in this little process is to have an actual transcript. It is a royal pain in the butt to listen to a 13-minute audio and try to create all of these visuals. If I had a transcript, a verbatim transcript, I could literally just read that and decide, I need to talk about benefits. Then he's going to say networking. He's going to talk about this and this. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, you'll have it by tomorrow night.
Right. But I think that's going to make the whole thing pretty smooth. And truth be told, if I was a podcaster, one of the things I'd probably do, you talked about show notes and some things like that, and that's kind of what you use as content here. But I think if I was going to be doing this seriously, I would have a transcriber, and I would send my audio file to them. I would get a written transcript, and then I could seriously go to town on this in a heartbeat.
Right. I have my own transcription service that I hire out from California, and they give me the transcript with hot links and everything, both in Word format and in PDF format. So I won't go through them. I'll just do it myself and get you this by tomorrow. But I think you're right. In the future, if you're going to be doing it that way, a podcaster would need the transcript, and so would a screencaster. We're kind of brainstorming how to do all this and stuff, and we'll have some really good information on once we get it all figured out and stuff. But gosh, I think it's just kind of an interesting concept. It's an interesting kind of way to leverage that content like we're talking about. And let's answer a couple of questions here. Lawrence says, good, now that you have the template made, it will give a whole series a consistent look and feel. Yeah, that's a good point, Lawrence. And I'll go ahead and unmute you again, Fred, here, if I can. Consistency is probably something that podcast listeners and podcasters like. I know a lot of them have their own special bumper and, their show branding and stuff like that. So, gosh, if you could come up with a template that you can consistently reuse, that makes it even easier to crank these out, right? Yes, because a lot of the podcasters now are being asked to get into blogging as well, because blogging, podcasting, and screencasting, if you've got all three, then you've got it made. You're not going to leave any money on the table. Roger that. Let's see what else we have for questions here. Chris Haney says, I teach software in my videos. Is it possible to create podcasts for software training? I guess it would be similar to asking you, Lon, if you could create podcasts for the Camtasia training. Maybe you could talk about the maybe I could talk about the benefits. Yes, you could, Chris, but I don't know if it would be in the realm of step-by-step instruction necessarily, but certainly for software
you could, talk about features or uses or, explore other kinds of things in that respect, maybe as your podcast content. Any thoughts on that, Fred? How do you take something that's completely inherently, visual, like a software demo, and crank it out as a podcast?
Well, in the early days, the podcasts that were for training actually had either workbooks or discussion guides or some kind of PDF documents there.
Oh, right.
So they could actually scroll through. You'd be listening to the podcast and seeing the PDFs with screen captures or with arrows or whatever it is, or even PowerPoint slides. So they had it available, and they've been doing this since the days of conference calls. Remember when people would say, "Okay, here's
audio tapes,
right. Here's your slide deck, okay," and then follow along with everybody as they go through the conference call while the leader is going through the slides. And I did that with a couple of courses that I had. This was before the day that we could do screencasts, and that happened to have been with PDF documents that were discussion guides, and people just looked at the discussion guides and were listening to the podcast. Now, imagine if you put those two together, and like what you're doing here, you got a video that's going to be a screencast, and that screencast, either created in PowerPoint or in Camtasia, doesn't matter, will give them the webinar effect as if they're actually looking at a professionally done webinar with good quality, and it'll give them the content that they want and also the visual.
You
aesthetic.
make a good point there, Fred. This is kind of the beginning step. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm creating a presentation out of an audio discussion. But certainly what I could do is create my slide content here and then mix it in with some screen capture content. So for example, Fred talks about podcast movement here. In fact, in the audio he mentions go to the podcast movement site and you'll be able to see all the speakers and get the room information. Well, I could certainly go to that site, and do a screen capture and use that as some of the content here. And, quick, easy, just super simple. Just fire up I could even use something like Jing, but I'd kind of want to edit it in Camtasia at the end. So for us Camtasia folks, you can follow along with the narration and, just kind of give a little more visual aspect here. Now that's going to complicate things because as you can see here, well, the page is loading. Oh gosh, I'm going to get to see the speakers and stuff like that, but it's going to add a little more in terms of editing and things like that. So I think this can actually kind of run the gamut from nice, simple to really buffed out kind of video experiences. So
right, you could also create a screencast file and put that in with edited versions so you can actually see a fast refresh of the screen.
What we would do then is drop that into Camtasia, of course, and then just edit it through some of our speed typing stuff or edit out the page loading and stuff like that. But, like I say, it adds a little more complexity. Now, the other thing that we'd certainly find useful from Camtasia is the ability to create assets in the library like a nice intro. Really kind of like some of the jazzy music and stuff that a lot of you podcaster guys do. And oh gosh, I can certainly come up with a sweet little intro, maybe even just using some of the assets in the library here. One of my favorites is like Behind a Cloud. If you guys seen my videos, you'll see me use this all the time. So, Fred's jazzy music goes here, stuff like that. And then save that to the library. And at that point, all I need to do is edit this text to, have my new episode title. Let's see, we're about at the top of the hour. Fred, you got any quick...
Just the last thing, and that is podcasters, since they do audio, they're definitely involved with pod-safe music or royalty-free music. So music to them is something that is very sacred, and they treat it very sacredly. So they've got the intros and the outros and everything else. And to take that and put it into a screencast. Now you've got high-quality audio contributing to the video there. And for screencasters, they can then get either royalty-free or pod-safe music. And once you're licensed for it, then you can, as you said, create now assets for your library. So you have intros and outros to all your screencasts or other templates.
And you know what? I'm going to leave with one other big tip. If you want to learn how to do audio right, go to the podcasters. Like I say, these guys have little radio stations in their house, and they really kind of know how to do that. In fact, I'm going to go to one of my favorite things here, Scoop It, and actually I should have searched for podcasting. There's a gal that I follow, and I'm starting to collect, Eileen Smith. There we go. She does a really nice job of putting out all kinds of stuff as far as setting up your gear, how to become a successful podcaster. And what does that mean? Well, it means getting your audio act together. Pretty much, period. Right? I mean, that's like the biggest thing. It's the bomb. It's the boss. And, you know, then things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put this in the links box also. Eileen is pretty awesome. She actually scoops a lot of good stuff on YouTube also.
There's one podcast in general that I would definitely recommend if any of the screencasters want to learn how to podcast. It's Dave Jackson's School of Podcasting is one. He's got 3 different tutorial paths, either for the ones who can't afford anything or the ones who make a small investment or the ones where money is no object. And then when you're ready to really go to the next level, Daniel J. Lewis has a podcast called The Audacity to Podcast, where he goes into different topics and gets you to the next level. He's got something called the Podcast Masterclass, and this is 3 and 4 figures. You're talking about $1,000 for a 4-week course, but he takes you from a good podcaster to an excellent podcaster.
Is this the site I'm looking for? Fred?
Yeah, the School of Podcasting is one where he takes you from beginning, and he's got 3 different paths to go through. It's a membership site where you can subscribe. I used to be a member of that for 3 years, and I've seen it grow into something that's really a good asset. And he's got a 6-week course, and he takes you from zero to hero. In other words, you know nothing about podcasting. He'll take you from that to the point where you've got your podcast published, and it's in iTunes in 6 weeks.
Nice.
And again, the next point after that is when you feel that you're a professional podcaster and you've been around for a while and you want to take it to a super level, then you go to Daniel J. Lewis's Podcast Masterclass, and that will take you from being a professional podcaster to a super podcaster. I mean, you're going to be competing there with some of the top podcasters in the country that are making, 5 figures every month.
That's okay. We don't care. Bring them on. We'll kick their asses. Chris Haney asks, what is the length of a typical podcast?
The length of a typical podcast is whatever content you have, the justifiable amount of time that it needs to be spent, and no more than that. Some are 20 minutes. That's what people will tell you because that's the average commute in a car for somebody going to work every day. And they want to listen to an episode, maybe an interview with an entrepreneur such as I have had, or they just want to get some training and education. So 20 minutes is industry standard for if your listener is going to be a commuter. But there are podcasts that go for 2.5, 3.5 hours, like No Agenda with Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak, and that's twice a week.
Nice. Okay. Thanks, Fred. I'm going to go ahead and mute you up.
Thank you.
And we'll be doing some more stuff for sure. And
Okay, thank you, Lon.
Cool stuff out. Catch you later, boss. Does anyone have any other questions to wrap us up here? Anything that we've talked about or anything that's come to mind? And if not, we'll kind of head out for the night. I hope you found this kind of useful. It's one of those things that I like to do to kind of, get people to think about some other stuff because, leveraging what you're already doing is one of the best things that you might think about, okay? Because sometimes we miss these kinds of things and all of that good stuff, right? Lauren says, thanks, Lon. This was an unexpected surprise and really gets me thinking about doing podcasts. Awesome, Lawrence. You know what? If you're doing narration to your videos, you already have a podcast. Sweet. All right, let's get after it. All right, you knuckleheads, get out there and make me proud.